So the global elite, Ian, we hear that term bandied around. Who are they?
It's a very, very good question, and of course it's the question that would be asked by a mainstream journalist to try and sort of derail the discussion right from the outset, because it would be futile to try and pinpoint it down to specific individuals. In fact, any of the individuals that we see in the media, that we see presented as the political elite, these are not part of the inner sanctum. I mean, the inner sanctum was probably best defined by Dr. John Coleman in 1986 in his book Committee of 300. And even in his research, he established that even within the Committee of 300, there's an inner sanctum who he referred to as the Olympians, which is a group of 13 within that group. I use the phrase, and I appreciate it doesn't sort of roll off the tongue too easily, but I use the phrase, it is those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom, and they literally are a shadowy Kabul, and all the names that we know, and I'm sure many of those names will be raised during the course of this discussion, but these are not the real players.
Okay, now then, Neil, I'm 43, and really I was 40 before I sort of realised there was something wrong with mainstream news, and I became aware of false flag terror. You're under 30, so how come you've woken up to this at such a young age?
Well, just because it's so apparent that things in the media, the way that it's being portrayed, they're obviously falsehood. You know, it's been falsified. The media contradicts itself. Even down to sort of recent things, you know, it really depends on whose side you're on, whether they're a rebel, whether they're a freedom fighter, whether this is an uprising of the people, whether this is just mindless looting and rioting. So,
and you mentioned the internet. I mean, how much has that influenced you? And I mean, a lot of people say, well, you can't believe what you see on the internet.
No, of course you can't. But you can't believe what you see in the papers either. You can't believe what you read in books. People will often come to you and say, oh well, this book says this. Well, that's fine, but that's an opinion, and that's what's great about the internet, is that basically it affords for you to get lots and lots of different opinions. And of course you've got to go through these things and sort of examine them and see which has got validity, which has got legs, and which is complete nonsense. But at least it gives you a starting point to then go and look for evidence and look for certain connections and things like that.
Okay. Now, we were talking about some of the institutions and corporations that the global elite belong to. Can you enlighten us on some of those?
Well, I mean, the Bilderberg Group is one of them. But even like Ian was saying, you could argue, say, Prince Bernhard or Queen Beatrix, who are the sort of founding members of the Bilderberg Group. People who started the Trilateral Commission, people like Walter Lippmann and stuff like that, the CFR, and then obviously the Trilateral Commission and stuff like that. You could even argue people at the top of the United Nations. I mean, people like Kurt Waldheim were actually ex-SS, and he was the Director General of the United Nations. But as you said, if you've heard these people's names, they're just placements. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carol Quigley, all of these people, Karl Rove, all of these people who are distinctly evil people that have got sort of a lot of power, they're basically there to steer people in a direction.
Right. And you were saying, Ian, that you believe that they're not really interested in nation states. They're not.
No, absolutely. These guys are effectively transnationals or globalists. I mean, they have a passport by accident of birth, but they're not interested in the nation state. They have no loyalty whatsoever, either to a nation state or certainly to the people of that nation. And this is epitomized by the likes of Peter Sutherland, former Attorney General of Ireland in the Irish government in his younger days, but he quickly moved into the EU, where he was EU Commissioner. He was the founding Director General of the World Trade Organization in 1994, I believe it was. Today, he's the chairman of Goldman Sachs. He's a former chairman of BP, and he was actually on the board of Royal Bank of Scotland when it collapsed and was taken into public ownership, at which point he was asked to leave. And I believe that Peter Sutherland proved his loyalty to the rightful, or those who think they're the rightful rulers. He proved his loyalty in September of 2008, when he effectively presided over a meeting between Brian Cowen and Brian Lenihan, the Taoiseach and effectively the Chancellor of Ireland, Dermot Gallagher, who was chairman of Anglo-Irish Bank, and Paul Gallagher, who was at the time the Attorney General. Gleeson and Paul Gallagher are both Bilderbergers, and effectively Peter Sutherland, who is tagged the father of globalization, effectively sacrificed the Irish nation and the Irish people to his globalist masters in September of 2008, when he instructed Cowen and Lenihan to effectively to get the taxpayer to underwrite all the debts of the Irish bank.
Just to interject, if you notice, one of the people that we're not mentioning is politicians. Not presidents, not prime ministers, not chancellors. None of these people have got power. Even the people that are behind them. This is our point. If Zbigniew Brzezinski and Carol Quigley have not got the power, do you really think that Obama's got any power? Do you think that Cameron's got any power, or do you think he's running to a script?
So, I mean, I think they're running the scripts. I mean, I just think that they're reasonably proficient actors. That's my personal opinion. But how do you think...
Socio-psychopathic actors.
Okay. But how do you think, you know, when does the meeting take place between David Cameron and whoever's controlling?
Well, they're sounded out, and this is why you've got groups like Bilderberg, this is why you've got groups like Skull and Bones, Phi Beta Kappa. In England, you've got the Bullingdon Club and various other university organisations that they're sounding out. I mean, one of the best expressions of this is if you go and watch Yes Prime Minister and see who's really got the power in that. That was written very, very accurately. Sure. And one of the things that they talk about all the time is this person's sound. We'll put him up, we'll see if he does what basically we will tell him to do. If he does, he'll get a reward. If he does something terrible, he'll get a really big reward.
Okay, and...
Alan Mendelsohn.
And Blair, of course, another good example, I think. Let's come on to the situation in Libya, because this is something which is very recent. You know, all the newspapers are saying that the rebels are now about to bring down Gaddafi. Can you give us an opinion, Ian?
I stated right from the outset that the Arab Spring was a construct initiated in Egypt, but the ultimate target was always Libya. The game plan was very, very clear for those of us that follow the agenda. And in fact, let me say that there is a particular individual, a guy called Terry Boardman, who is a superb geopolitical analysis, and he wrote a book in 1998 called Mapping the New Millennium. And in that book, he stated categorically that 2011 would be the year they nail Libya. And Terry, like myself, he doesn't claim any special insight. We simply read the scripts. And Terry is a very astute student of The Economist. And Terry's observation is that if you look at the articles that are published in The Economist, the articles that actually look at the multi-generational agenda, it's amazing the information that's there. And Libya was always the target here. What they couldn't afford was another situation like pre the invasion of Iraq, where millions of people all around the world hit the streets in protest. Of course, it didn't make a blind bit of difference. They were still going to go ahead and do it. But they didn't want a repeat of that. So what they needed to do was create a construct where basically Libya simply became another falling domino. So you start the process in Egypt. It was a double benefit because it gave them the opportunity to remove Mubarak, who was in his 80s, and to make sure that the succession of Egypt was managed by the global corporatists. And then, of course, you just move it around the Middle East. And so by the time you get to Libya, which was like number 5, I think, in the chain, by the time you get to Libya, it's just another falling domino. But the target here was Libya all along for the primary reason. There's two ostensible reasons, but the primary reason was exactly the same as with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, the moment that George Bush was awarded the 2000 election by the democratic process of the Supreme Court ruling 5-3 in his favor, the moment that George Bush was awarded the presidency, Saddam immediately stated that he was going to start selling Iraqi oil in euros, which he did right through until May. And then people will remember that iconic moment on the USS Lincoln, where Bush flew in on the plane, and in the backdrop behind him was mission accomplished. And people believed that mission accomplished statement to relate to the military victory of the troops getting to Baghdad. In reality, what it related to was the statement that from that moment forward, Iraqi oil was once again being traded in the petrodollars.
Sure.
And Gaddafi, sorry to interject, Gaddafi was talking about nationalising the oil fields of Libya as well, and what he'd done was he'd actually done quite a shrewd manoeuvre where he'd got a lot of money back from the conglomerates, and what he'd actually done with all this huge amount of money was he distributed it evenly between the peoples of Libya. When was the last time any of you got a tax rebate?
Now, I'd just like to broaden it a bit as well. What about countries such as Yemen and Bahrain, where their revolutions appear to be more genuine? Are they not? Let's
go back to Libya a second, because there's a very, very significant factor about Libya, and that was one of the primary causes, like Saddam moving Iraqi oil from the petrodollar to the euro. Gaddafi's game plan was to start trading Libyan oil in gold. He was looking to establish an Arab-African economy based on the gold dinar, thereby potentially pulling the rug out from under the Rockefeller-controlled fiat petrodollar.
I mean, a lot of people will say, "Come on, you can't possibly all of these Middle Eastern countries, control them to uprise." I mean. You think it's all orchestrated, the whole Arab Spring situation then?
Yeah, oh, totally. But the other thing that's interesting is when you're mentioning Bahrain or whatever, as opposed to Libya, it's how it's been depicted in the UK and the Western world's media. Because if you read between the lines, you can see that it's monstrous what's going on, certainly in Bahrain, and I think it was the United Arab Emirates and places like that. Even in Syria, if you read between the lines, you can see what's actually going on. But we're cultivated. This is the thing about people. You can present it in such a way. And there was two psychologists, because Gerbner and Gross, and they had this, it's a concept called cultivation theory. And the premise is that the more you watch television, the more likely you are to believe reality from the way that the television predicts it or displays it. And so anything that goes against this television view, you're not going to immediately connect to. And the television view is that that Libya is a terrible, terrible dictatorship with legitimate rebels, ragtag bunch of rebels that just so happen to be, armed with brand new Israeli and American weapons. I'm sure that's a coincidence. But this is the point. It's the way that it's displayed to the media and the way that people absorb what is actually happening.
Okay.